compelling stories are not hard to find. You just need to know where to look. Join your host, Dr. Eric Shaw, prosecutor Ryan Frank, writer Adrian Bonenberger, and comedian Ryan Connor as they interview ordinary people about their extraordinary experiences. This is Baggage.
Hi, and welcome to Baggage. Tonight, our guest is Kyle Mitchell. He is an immigration lawyer practicing out of New York City. I want to turn things over to him for a quick introduction to just he can tell us about himself, and then we'll jump into some stories tonight.
Sure. So thanks for having me, guys. I've been practicing immigration law for around 2.5 years now. Even before the Trump administration, it was pretty stressful type of work. Now, every day, there's something new and crazy coming out that is kind of redefining how we do things. So we've especially been on our toes quite a bit recently. So I went to law school here in the city at Cardozo Law. I didn't really know that I was going to be an immigration attorney. It just kind of happened over time. I ended up starting in business immigration, which is a little bit less stressful. You're more so dealing with clients who are very, how can I put this? They know more than you. So, and I was just working part-time while I was doing that. It was a very interesting way to get my feet wet. And then I went in and got a full-time job doing what I do now, which is removal defense. So particularly asylum hearings and what we call special immigrant juvenile status.
Can you kind of walk us through what a typical kind of immigration case looks like? Because I think that's something that most people don't really have an understanding of. I know like my interactions with courts have been either like a speeding ticket or being on a jury, but I know that it's different with the immigration stuff. It's not necessarily a seated jury. It's usually just with the judge I mean, you tell me. Sorry, I'm kind of speaking out of turn there.
Yeah, no. So it all starts with a notice to appear. So let's say someone enters the country without inspection, but they get picked up by Border Patrol. They're given a notice to appear, which tells them to go to an immigration court, usually in Texas. But if they move, they give the updated address. So they go to, for example, here in New York. The first proceeding is what's called a master calendar hearing. So there, it's just pretty much a room full of people who are doing scheduling hearings and their attorneys. So in the past, generally, people would go to these hearings and they'd be like, oh, I don't have a lawyer. And then so they would be given another hearing date and then they would come back, hopefully, with a lawyer. Nowadays, it's a little bit different where if you don't have a lawyer, you're kind of just getting detained by ICE immediately as soon as you leave the court. But how it's set up is, you're right, there's just one immigration judge. There's one DHS, so Department of Homeland Security attorney. And then there's maybe 100 people, either outside the courtroom or on the courtroom virtually. And so everyone's kind of processed accordingly. And then if all goes well, you're given an individual hearing. So that is more of a direct, it's just the client, me, their attorney, the government attorney, and the judge, and maybe a clerk. And so those hearings are, in theory, they're supposed to be about 2 hours in general, where you present the entire case. In practice, especially recently, they've been trying to do these quite quick. I went to one about a month ago, and I heard the judge say, oh, come back in 15 minutes, I'll be done here. Basically, in those, we just run through the testimony. We don't really give opening statements. We kind of discuss what's going on with the case, perhaps, and then go into testimony, and then we do a closing statement. And the judge will often give their decision right there, or they'll put it off to later to think about it. That's generally how the process goes.
I have a boatload of questions. So is this appointed work, retained work, mixture of both?
So for me, it's all retained.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not the court-appointed attorney. I know that there's a lot of charities that represent people in removal proceedings. But for me, it's all people who came to us who are trying to, do the right thing, get some sort of status. And so, yeah, they've paid us.
Would they ever get appointed attorneys? If they're detained, do they get appointed immigration attorneys or no?
No, not that I've heard of.
Okay.
No, I haven't heard of it.
That kind of makes sense. It's not a criminal proceeding. It's like a quasi civil or whatever. So, okay. So another question is, you said they're given notice. I imagine a lot of your clients they're walking in, you're retained. Hey, I got notice to leave. But from what you see in the courtroom, are most people walking in off the street because they got a notice, or is it pre-hearing detention? Has it changed too over time?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed. I mean, nowadays it seems people are just getting detained at the border. And before they were too, but they would be released either on bond, or they'd just be released because there's no point in holding these people. They want to go through and process their asylum claim. Are they coming off the street? Typically, yeah. They're given a piece of paper that says appear at the immigration court on this date. And so even if they don't have an attorney, they're showing up because, they don't really know what to expect most of the time.
The middle of last year, how long would these proceedings take? You get notice to end up getting your hearing. How long would that take?
So,
like within 2 months, within 6 months, within a year?
Well, so from when they get the notice, generally, it could potentially be a year before they go to their master hearing. It could be even longer because a lot of times they were getting scheduled for a hearing and then the judge just wasn't there anymore. The judge retired, or a big problem was they were being told, go to the immigration court at a time to be announced, on a date to be announced, before a judge to be announced. And then they had to hope that they'd get whatever follow-up notice. But yeah, back then things were generally a bit slower because there wasn't this rush to kind of process and remove as many people as possible.
And what is it now? If someone gets a notice, how long before they've had their master hearing? Is that the right term?
Yeah, well, yeah, master hearing, yeah. It's tough to say because I'm not getting too many. Well, actually, I could probably say. I'd say it's probably within a couple months. That's what we've been saying. Yeah.
And the evidence at these hearings, I mean, with that time frame, if you have a criminal case with a couple months to get ready, that's not a lot of time. So the evidence that has to be put forward, is it usually just your client? Like, I can't go back to my country because of X, Y, and Z, and they're placed under oath? Are you required to have other evidence?
Right. So the first hearing is a scheduling hearing. So in times past, you could just show up with nothing prepared, or with just me, and then the judge might be a little bit annoyed, like, "Oh, you're the attorney. Why didn't you send in whatever, the I-589 asylum application? Why didn't you send that in?" But if we were just retained, then it wouldn't be an issue. But yeah, to gather all the evidence can be very difficult, especially if someone's from Ecuador and they need, get your medical records from when you were attacked. Get the police report from when you went to the local police and they told you to go away. Now, there's other things like we get the country conditions, and of course we do a personal statement to get their whole story out there, and then we do the testimony. Now, most of that we would prepare for the final hearing. But at the master hearing, nowadays, we do kind of have to have a lot prepared because they're basically looking at all the evidence up front and they're saying, "Oh, this is enough due process. You don't need another hearing. I'm just dismissing it."
What happens then? Something just gets dismissed. That's like your client's got to be like, "What the hell's going on? What?"
Yeah. So,
and when you say dismissed, that means like they didn't win. They're getting sent home.
It used to be a really good thing to get your case dismissed because you were out of removal proceedings. You're just sitting pretty. You're not going to be removed. You're not going to be able to get a work permit, but you could just hang out in the US and, work under the table. You could eventually marry a US citizen and get status through that, or who knows, but you would be generally safe to be in the US. But now, especially if you've been here less than 2 years, your case is being dismissed and then you're going to be detained by ICE pretty much right away. And then you'll be placed in what's called expedited removal. So from your jail cell, you're supposed to, pretty much put your case together from there about why you have a credible fear of being in the U.S., and then you have to articulate that before a judge, and then you're put back in removal proceedings, but you might still be detained throughout this whole time.
So when you say after their hearing they're being detained by ICE, it's a lot like that. It's one way or another. The hearing has a resolution, and then okay, ICE is taking custody of you at the courthouse.
Yeah. So hypothetically, maybe there's some cases where I could come in and I could say, hey, well, this person actually already has some kind of status. Like maybe they did special immigrant juvenile status and it was approved and they're just waiting on their green card. So hypothetically, ICE shouldn't detain them because they already have a pathway toward permanent residency that's pretty much set in stone. But from what I've heard is at many of the immigration courts, ICE is already outside with a list. And so you come out, even if the judge gave you another hearing date, you're still going to be approached and likely apprehended. There's not much an immigration attorney can really do at that point, aside from ask for the name of the ICE agent and where are you sending my client, and maybe try to explain what's going on with the case. But
is that two separate issues? Is that, okay, great, we still have a future hearing date, but ICE is detaining? That's not necessarily ICE taking and removing them from the country right then, right? It is just detaining them, but they still have a court date. And after that court date, maybe not removal, right?
Right. So they could be detained, and let's say they're scheduled for their next hearing in 3 months. So they might be detained 3 months, or they might be detained for, I don't know, a day and then let back out. Or, it's possible they could just be removed if, I don't know, the paperwork gets shuffled the wrong way. There's that. I haven't heard of that happening.
Are you telling me that the federal government would possibly screw it up and remove somebody that maybe shouldn't be removed? That's crazy. We're going to have to bleep all that.
That is crazy. You wouldn't think about that, would you?
No.
Does the government lawyers, I guess on the other side, do they ever bring up evidence to the contrary of someone coming in, be like, man, this guy is just shady, or he has a criminal history, we shouldn't proceed with this?
So that's actually a good question. If there is criminal history, they will definitely bring that up. So one of the things that we have to do before we have the final hearing is we have to make sure that our clients do a biometric check-in. So they basically go in, give their fingerprints, and then so the government has access to any criminal history if there is. Now, how does criminal history come into play? Well, it could affect credibility, that's for sure. And also crimes of moral turpitude, which is, it's kind of hard to say, but, a crime that is especially bad. If you mug someone, right, or if you committed a certain level of fraud, that would just be an automatic bar to any relief.
And from what I understand, not even necessarily felony conduct, lying, cheating, stealing, shoplifting, false police report, that kind of stuff. I know that where I've run into it before, it used to be, hey, my guy can't, I do a lot of domestic violence. My guy can't plead guilty to domestic violence. Can we do a Crespo plea, which is you plead not guilty, but they don't object to any hearsay, and you say what happens. It's kind of it's an end around, and you're kind of faking it, a trial. But on paper, It says, I pled not guilty. The judge didn't make a finding that I was guilty, deferred it so I can go to some classes and the case will be dismissed, that kind of thing. Or that was usually okay. And that sometimes still can be okay. But then it could be like if somebody had a record and they had immigration concerns, hey, as long as he doesn't get more than a 6-month suspended sentence. So if you do 5 months suspended sentence, then that won't trigger removal proceedings. Sure, whatever, right? Now people come to court and they'll be like, I have to talk to immigration attorney. And I used to be able to say, no, we can do this, we can do that. And I'm like, yeah, talk to immigration. I have no idea, because I have no idea. It's shifting sands. I don't know what the threshold is now, and it's different. We're seeing it immigration cases really affecting criminal cases and being able to prosecute them in unintended ways.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't had that quite happen to me yet, but I'd expect that there's likely almost no leeway at this point.
Isn't another problem that particularly for citizens coming from countries that are dictatorships or, really bad authoritarian, I'm not describing the United States here, other countries, not us, coming here, looking for freedom, et cetera, or whatever pieces of that they can still get their hands on, isn't a problem that in many cases these citizens will have been charged with some sort of really trivial offense. I know this was very common in the USSR. Anybody who was a political dissident would get charged with some asinine crime, often sent to a gulag or exiled from the party. This is also the case in Nazi Germany. And I think it's very common when you go to these types of countries where part of the modus operandi for an authoritarian government is if you're a decent person, they convict you of some crime. And then if you come to the United States and you've got that crime on your on your sheet, it's like, oh, he committed a felony in Iran. Well, a felony in Iran might have been protesting against the Ayatollahs, for example. But does that disqualify you? And I guess the other follow-up to that question is like any type of felony, does any type of felony in another country disqualify you in the United States? The follow-up to that would be, is the due process, is the system that we have, the process we have baked into the system sufficient to tease out the nuance there and give folks an opportunity to say, I was in a prison for 5 years for protesting the Ayatollahs. That should qualify me for immigration, not disqualify me from it.
Yeah, for sure. So in the past, that might actually strongly help a case, especially if we were trying to do political asylum or, generally one of the elements we need to prove for asylum is that your home government was persecuting you. So if I came in and I was like, yeah, he was in jail for 3 years on some trumped up charges, then yeah, that could help my case. Now, could a judge look at that and be like, oh, I don't know, it says you were in jail for murder. I don't know if I should trust you, or, oh, you were in jail for fraud. It would really come down to the judge, because one of the real issues in this field is that the judges have almost unlimited discretion. So it'll really come down to whatever they feel like. And if you have a nice judge, then you'd be surprised what kinds of cases you could win. If you have a mean judge, then they'd look at that and be like, I don't know how we can proceed with this case. You committed a crime underneath another government that disqualifies you from asylum. That's it. And then we would try to appeal it.
What cases do you primarily have with retained clients? Political asylum, or what are some other categories? Violence, escaping from violence?
So there's several categories. Political asylum is one. The one that we mostly have is what's called particular social group. You have to articulate that your client was part of some kind of group that is recognized within their home country, and that because of their membership in that group, they were persecuted, and the government of their home country either did the persecution or they allowed it to happen, like they didn't care. So one of the broadest categories that I've seen was literally just Ecuadorian woman, right? So that's a very broad category. So you normally pair it with other things, like an Ecuadorian woman unable to leave her relationship. It can be anything, almost. It just has to be recognizable. And it can be tricky because there's not like a really good place to research the case law on this. The judges don't really have to stick to what they find to be a particular social group. They can disagree with other judges. Really, we can only go through what has been granted on appeals.
You could have a situation where a woman is in a domestic violence situation. She ends up fleeing, and it might be a, call it what you will, male dominated society where they don't really take that very seriously.
Mhm.
So that if she goes back, that's going to be a danger of, physical. She could be in physical danger.
Yeah.
Is that a type of scenario you would deal with?
That's exactly it. That's
Okay. And you could have a judge that either it's like, that's, no different than any other person that's in a bad relationship versus somebody that might be sympathetic. Just depends on what judge you get that day.
Yeah. And I've had government attorneys ask questions like that and even challenge and be like, well, there's domestic violence here. What would change? Or they'll say, well, in your home country, is there really nowhere else in Ecuador you could go that you wouldn't be safe from this one man? Like, what are his means? How could he follow you across the country? So those are other elements we have to address. Why it's unreasonable to expect someone to completely upend their life and go to, not the United States, but some distant place in their home country where similar issues persist and expect that they, could start a new life there and be safe. Now, I know with this particular fact pattern, under the last Trump administration, it was basically closed off. There was a BIA, which is the next level of appeals in immigration court, decision that completely closed it off, which was quite bad because this is actually one of the more common routes for asylum is women who are in relationships where there's domestic violence and they can't get help from the police or the government at all.
Right.
So we could have Ryan ask you detailed questions all night long. This is what he does with there's guests that have similar niches to his. I think Ryan Connor had a question though.
Oh no, I was just saying, thank God you're not a helicopter pilot. We have no idea what's being talked about tonight.
Oh God, a helicopter lawyer pilot. That'd be a little much.
You guys wouldn't even have to show up.
I wanted to give you the chance to maybe kind of share some of your stories from the courtroom. And I guess we kind of spread it out into different categories of, things that are either, particularly emotionally charged or meaningful to you or things that were kind of goofy or just wild stories. So I'll let you kind of take over here.
Okay. On my very second day of work, I was put into a master hearing right away. And I was immediately yelled at by the judge. I didn't really have too much of an idea what I was doing, but I spoke with all the attorneys there, so I knew the process. Basically, everything was going fine, and the judge was asking me about the nature of the case, what's going on with my client. So they were doing special immigrant juvenile status, which means that they are under 21, they're going to the family court, they're trying to get a finding of, one, I have a guardian who can look after me, and two, either one or both of my parents neglected, abused, abandoned me. I don't have to prove that to the immigration judge. I just have to explain that's what's going on with their case. So I tell the judge, that's what's happening. And then she goes, is it a long or a short court? And I had no idea what that meant. And so I'm like, Your Honor, I'm sorry, but what do you mean by that? And then so she stops me right there. And then she goes on about a 5-minute rant where she asks me, how long have I been practicing immigration law? I was like, it's my second day. And she eventually ended up calling me a potted plant, which I didn't know what it meant at the time. But over the years, it's a lawyer who is just in court, just to be in court, just a body. They're not arguing their client's case. So in retrospect, I am kind of upset that I was called that. But anyway, I was given a new hearing date. It turns out a long court and a short court, at least to this judge, it just means how long is it going to take to do the family court proceedings? She could have phrased it like that. I would have been able to answer the question, but they're all basically long courts anyway, if you call it that. I've never had another judge in the hundreds of times I've done this ever ask me that question. I think it was just unique to her, but I ended up back in front of her about a year or two later, and I think it was on the same case. And I just updated her. I was like, yeah, we have everything done. Can we dismiss it? Can we terminate the proceedings? And then she was like, of course. And she was so nice to me. And I've never had a judge be that nice to me, where she was like, she got the Spanish translator to say, your lawyer is so great and did so much for you make sure you thank him. And I don't know why. I don't know why this judge was like this. I'm still kind of confounded by it to this day.
It sounds like you made some improvements from that second day, though.
I mean, I'd hope so. I'd hope I did.
What was there a part of you when you got called a potted plant where you're like, maybe it's a compliment?
Yes. I was just like, what the hell is a potted plant? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Why am I being
It doesn't
called
sound
a plant?
positive.
Yeah. I was like, am I pleasant like to have in the room with you? I don't know.
Gotta go
I
home
like
and
plants. Cool.
You're cleaning the air in the room.
go home
Yeah.
and like look it up on Urban Dictionary. Like, what the hell did this mean? Is this some sort of new slang I'm not aware of?
So actually, one of the attorneys I work with was walking by and someone called her a potted plant. So that's when I kind of put it together. I was like, oh, okay, maybe it means like you just
If they're saying it to her, that can't be good. Yeah.
yeah.
What about? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm in question jail. Go ahead. Somebody else. Go ahead.
Oh, you had mentioned to me about a pretty wild story about a woman who came up with a pretty intense excuse for wanting to be here. Can you go into more detail about that one?
Of course. So this was another one. I'm about 99% sure it was Ecuador. So this was one of my first big cases I was doing. So we were still under Biden, and at the time we had something called prosecutorial discretion, where, like I said earlier, we could dismiss the removal proceedings and you're just in the U.S. without status. So for a lot of people, asylum is a pretty high standard to win, and the odds are often stacked against you. So back then, we were recommending it for a lot of our cases. Now, we don't have that anymore, but back then, it was a pretty good option if there was a good chance you were going to lose. So this woman, we were going through her case, and basically, she tells me this extremely long, convoluted story about how her mother-in-law is like the biggest serial killer in all of Ecuador. According to her, the mother-in-law murdered her own son, so the husband of the woman in front of me poisoned him, and then she burned one of their neighbors alive. She pretty much beat up my client like consistently, like would regularly beat her up. And I was asking her, I was like, how big is this woman? Like, what is she like? Because I'm picturing like a 6'4" like freak of nature if she's able to like do all this stuff. And she's like, oh, like 5'6", like whatever. I did not believe her. And so the story culminated with she tried to get away. She tried to relocate to get away from this mother-in-law. And this is years after the son is dead. So there's really no connection aside from the child. So it's the grandchild of the mother-in-law. And so she flees to somewhere completely different in Ecuador. I think it was to Cuenca, one of the main cities. And then so a black Jeep pulls up. 4 guys get out. They put like a bag over her head, drag her into the Jeep, drive like 8 hours back to where the mother-in-law lives, and she gets thrown onto the front lawn. They pull the bag over her head, and then she's like, if you ever try to fucking leave again, I'm going to have you killed. And then, of course, she left, and then she came to the U.S. And so I heard this story, and I was like, okay, this is like a little bit far-fetched. I haven't really heard of anything similar to this happening. And I was like, I believe you. I don't think the judge is going to believe you. And so
I believe you. I'm just saying the judge might not believe you. Right.
Right. I mean, I generally go with what my clients say until they start contradicting themselves. And she hadn't contradicted herself. But it was just crazy to believe. And so anyway, I'm asking her, begging her to take this deal. And she goes, no, God is on my side, which you never want to hear from a client when they disagree with you and then they say God is on my side. But to her credit, we went to the court. We took testimony on her whole story, and she ended up getting asylum.
Got the right judge. So the judge believed her, or at least enough that granted her asylum.
I could have sworn I saw the judge wipe a tear from her eye.
Oh, wow. Hey, everybody, Ryan here. I wanted to take a minute to introduce our listeners to one of the charities we collaborate with, the Dear Jack Foundation. And here to tell us about Dear Jack is their Senior Director of Operations, Susan Wendishen. Hey, Susan, so can you tell the listeners a little bit about what Dear Jack is?
Absolutely. So the Dear Jack Foundation is a nonprofit. We work with program participants all over the country, and we specifically support young adult cancer patients and survivors. Young adult, in our definition, is defined as between the ages of 18 and 39, and we have programs that support them from diagnosis all the way through to survivorship.
Excellent. Now, if somebody is interested in supporting Dear Jack, where can they go?
So our website is just www.dearjackfoundation.org. So you can always go there and check it out. But we have a great Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn that we're just Dear Jack Foundation. You can find us there. There are plenty of ways to get involved, but as a small organization, we always need extra dollars. So any support that anybody can give is always helpful and appreciated.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't know. I believe Ecuador seems like a violent place. I have a case right now where I won't get into the facts because it's a pending case, but basically it's a misdemeanor that is not the most serious, right?
Mm-hmm.
But why we want to take a special look at it is there was an Interpol hit, or somehow we found out that he had, I know what it was. At a previous hearing, someone had said, he's not here. He's in Ecuador serving a 30-year sentence for murder, which was true. But then he showed up later. Like, how is he here? 2 bodies had showed up on his property and they prosecuted him for murder.
Mm-hmm.
And then that got reversed on appeal. Something about like a pretty corrupt court system. I don't know, corrupt in prosecuting him or corrupt in getting him out of it. I don't know. But that's a little unusual to have that kind of background in the case. Which brings one of my questions. You've brought up Ecuador a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a particular country that you see, a disproportionate amount of people? And maybe it's just specific to New York, but what do you deal with?
So my boss is actually Ecuadorian. So he ends up bringing in a lot of people from Ecuador. But
Gotcha.
I would say that it is probably a source of a lot of the people seeking asylum, along with Honduras, Guatemala. I've had a case from Peru, and then El Salvador.
El Salvador. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
But I mean, it became kind of weird because the whole government shifted. So then for a while, every asylum claim was kind of a loser because you weren't afraid of gang violence anymore. But nowadays it's kind of shifted where, okay, maybe that government is a little bit authoritarian. Maybe they're possibly weaponizing the gangs or just grabbing reporters. So it's kind of become perhaps a stronger claim for asylum nowadays.
Now, are you saying a stronger claim because it resonates with the judges or the government? It's easier to deal with them?
For both, because you can articulate like a better claim because, okay, we know that the government in El Salvador is kind of just does whatever they want. They don't really have due process. They're kind of just rounding up people with tattoos. Way back in the past, every claim was about, I'm being attacked, it's unsafe, and the government does nothing. Now the government just rounds everyone up. So it just changed completely to basically who the persecutor is and the reason for the persecution. Now, I haven't had an El Salvador case too recently, but I'm not entirely sure how it would come across differently between like the judge, the government attorney. But I just know that we've taken some of these cases on and we feel like they're a bit stronger.
Do you have any stories or examples of cases that you thought were going to be a slam dunk and someone who really deserved to be here and the judge just, for whatever reason, wouldn't hear it, and anything that's more kind of tugged at your heartstrings there? So
every case that I go into, I always convince myself that it's a winner, but quite often not. I'm never surprised when an immigration judge rules against us. Because it's kind of to be expected. I'd say the vast majority of the time, especially now. But I will say one that's especially heartbreaking that they haven't been detained or anything yet, but it was actually a case that I won. I guess I'll go back to the beginning. About 6 months ago, I had a case, and it was an individual hearing. And basically what happened, it was a guy from Honduras with his wife and his kid. And so in Honduras, he was former military guy, and then he started his own security business. And, he was doing quite well for himself, making a lot of money. And then one day, he gets kind of run off the road by some gang members. I'm pretty sure it was MS-13 or might have been Mara 18. But either way, they run him off the road, and then they tell him, they're like, we know exactly who you are. We know exactly where you live. You have 24 hours to join our gang because, you have skills that we want, right? He's like, okay, whatever. He actually goes home. He tells his wife, and then he goes to sleep and he wakes up and he goes to work the next morning. He completely ignored the threat. So he's at work, and then he gets a call from his wife, and then he's like, oh, what's going on? Almost like he completely forgot about this whole threat, or he didn't take it seriously. And then she says, yeah, someone knocked on the door and there's a letter. And it was exactly like maybe you see in a movie where someone cuts the letters out of a magazine and like tapes it. And basically it said, you have about 6 hours left before we chop you into pieces, right? So he runs home, he grabs his wife and his kid, and then he goes to the police department. And he has the letter in his hand, and he tells them the whole story. And then they literally tell him, there's nothing we can do. There's literally nothing we can do to keep you safe. You have to leave the country right now.
Wow.
And so that's what he does. He calls up, I think it was his cousin or something. The three of them get picked up, and, they were living this like good upper middle class life. And then suddenly they had to just drop everything, drove straight to the border, left, the vast majority of their stuff behind, and never went back. So when they came to me, they had been in the US over a year. So for asylum, there's a 1-year deadline to apply. Now, Border Patrol and ICE don't always do a great job of telling people that. So they missed their 1-year deadline by like a couple months. So they were barred from asylum. But what they could do was get withholding of removal, which basically says, okay, your home country is too dangerous. We'll never deport you there unless, I don't know, there's some major change with their government, right? So it's not as good as asylum, but they get to stay in the US. They have a kind of legal status. They can get work permits. They don't have to worry about deportation. Well, what happened last week? The Supreme Court said, okay, it's essentially all right to deport people to third countries. So those 3 people, that guy, his wife, and his kid, can pretty much be picked up whenever and deported to any third country that the U.S. has an agreement to deport people to, whether that's El Salvador or Mexico.
I know England does this as well, and I think Italy does it too. And I don't understand, what is the legal argument that's made in court that we should be able to send people back to some third country? I just can't understand how this is something that takes place.
Okay, so you'd be correct in thinking there's something a little weird with this procedure. So basically, there's no law or anything that says it's okay to do this. What happened was a bunch of people from Venezuela were rounded up. It's the famous Abrego Garcia case, and all the other people. They were rounded up, but it's very difficult to deport people to countries like Venezuela because the Venezuelan government is not going to let the flight land. But they want to get rid of these people. The U.S. government at the time wanted to get rid of these people. So they made a deal with El Salvador to take them. Was there any kind of legal backing that said this was okay? No, not really. So it was immediately challenged. And so it was challenged in the district court, and then it ended up going to the Supreme Court. But then they, so with an injunction, basically, saying that you can't do this, right? So then the Supreme Court rejected the injunction, which makes it so it might be illegal, it might not be illegal, but we're not going to say it's illegal right now and stop it from happening. it's a little bit confusing, but
yeah. And to really get down the rabbit hole with this Supreme Court now, and as of this recording, they just had a ruling on nationwide injunctions without getting into it and completely losing the audience. Basically, the position of the Supreme Court is we're not saying things like this are illegal or not illegal. We're just saying the executive has a lot of authority and we are only going to rule on things that are properly before us case by case. So essentially, there's a lot of discretion now with the federal government to do a whole range of things. And until it is before a court on a particular case, who knows? Everyone's just arguing. Tell me, it's one of those things that we rely on the premise in the United States of, innocent until proven guilty. Well, somebody in the same vein, somebody has to have the authority to do something. There are certain situations where a government just acts until a court says, no, you can't do that thing. They're waiting for somebody to tell them they can't do that thing. And that's kind of it sounds like that's kind of like the gray area that some of the immigration law is in right now.
What about, countries that we're friendly with? If someone, like, would we deport someone from Costa Rica or Mexico to El Salvador? Is that something that could be done? Or is it only when it's countries that where there's, let's just say Venezuela, for example?
So it's being done in cases where, kind of like with withholding of removal. So they won their case. They just couldn't do asylum because of, they missed the deadline or whatever. I mean, it's pretty similar standards. But, the government wants to get rid of these people who have the status for whatever reason. Okay, well, we have an agreement that, okay, you proved in court, you might get tortured if you're sent back to, I don't know, it could be a friendly country. It's hard to win asylum cases from a friendly country, but let's just say it's Mexico or something. Well, okay, you can't be sent back to Mexico, but you can be sent to El Salvador. Why not? We have an agreement with El Salvador. You don't have to worry about the gangs in Mexico going after you in El Salvador.
Because El Salvador didn't have any gangs, right?
Yeah. Or those gangs, they don't have anything against you. You'll be fine. You'll fit in great.
There's no way they have transnational contacts that could. Mm-hmm. Wow. Have you had any experience with people? And I don't know. This may have changed in the past like 20 years, which is when I have a brother from China. He was smuggled into the country by one of their human trafficking gangs. Mm-hmm. I don't want to name because they murder people in the United States. But he was automatically ordered to be deported, and then this is when he was like intercepted at the port in New Orleans, and then I don't know if it was a Port Authority person or Coast Guard, but they called Catholic Charities. Mm-hmm. That's how he got connected with our family. And this was in 94. And he basically fought this deportation order forever. Just, while he was a minor, he was trying to get asylum. Mm-hmm. And because, at least until 2008, mm-hmm. We know that the general recourse was 3 years minimum of labor for repatriation and coal mines often. Mm-hmm. So he's trying to get this asylum, and it was just refused, and we just all assumed it was like we didn't want to ruffle feathers with an economic partner. Even mm-hmm. though their human rights are obviously atrocious. So I'm wondering if you have any similar experiences either with people seeking asylum from China or, let's just say Saudi Arabia or any other country that's like autocratic where we're strong economic partners, but there might be some reason that someone would want asylum here.
Yeah, so a lot of asylum claims are just going to be immediately shut down for that very reason. we might have a guy from the UK who's like doesn't really have like a viable claim for being here, and he'll be like, oh well, what about asylum, and then we have to say, yeah, there's you will not win any sort of asylum from a country like that. Now, China specifically, I've never had a client from there, but one of my coworkers has a client who I see pretty much every couple of months, who's constantly coming in because they've been tangled up in litigation in the immigration court for years now. And the big issue is every time they go in, the judge wants the birth certificate, like prove that you're from China. He can't get it because they're not supplying it. He's on like a list of like, do not help this guy. So he's basically in limbo. So just every couple of months, they just meet up, and maybe until the judge changes or until something changes, it's probably just going to keep happening. I was surprised. I had a client from Peru, and we ended up winning his case. But I mean, I always thought Peru was kind of like a touristy kind of place. I know there's parts that are unsafe, like in Lima, but I got that case, and he was actually a guy who he'd done like security for like a U.S. base in Iraq, and he was being persecuted by some, I think it was FARC or some other communist group, and he was like, yeah, they actually like cut off like a piece of his eyeball. It's a very messed up situation, but we ended up winning his case. So that's probably the closest I can say to like a country that at least I don't really think of as being overtly dangerous, where we've had success in winning asylum.
Do you run into cases or see cases where they're fleeing their home country for sexual violence?
Yeah.
Because they've been a victim of sexual violence?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It can often be an element, and yeah, it can sometimes have the whole case revolve around it. I haven't personally taken in one of those cases before, like at an individual hearing. I've been involved in the process, so putting together the asylum claim. Now, there's definitely been some rough ones that I've talked to them and gotten their personal statements. Largely, they can be successful, but it really just comes down to the judge and how they feel about it. One of my coworkers lost one, I think on Monday. He had an individual hearing where, if I recall, the case was a woman who had been basically gang raped. And then she went to the police, and then she just decided, okay, I'm not staying in this country anymore, and she left. Now, I don't know exactly. I know we lost the case. I don't know exactly what the judge's decision was, but it could very simply have been like, well, what particular social group are you? Like, okay, you're a woman. That's not distinct enough. Like, you can't get protection from that. Maybe you didn't try to relocate somewhere in the country that would have been safer, or maybe you can't argue that the same thing wouldn't happen to you here. So there's a couple things judges can throw out to hurt your case like that.
One thing I'm not surprised, but just I think it is surprising to hear coming from you and just reading from the news in general recently. I feel like so much of this stuff, the judges' decisions are arbitrary, and I'm just really kind of taken aback by that. And I always feel like I have some degree of faith in our country's, law system and the opportunity for due process. Whereas it seems like more and more it's just like, well, the whim of this judge or the way the political winds are blowing that day. So it's just kind of frustrating to hear this reinforced by someone in the business.
Yeah. So the judges in immigration court fall under the Department of Justice. So Pam Bondi is their boss. And with judges and even the DHS, like ICE attorneys, they're not like they're all evil or they're all just like hate immigrants. It's just they're kind of limited by their policy. I mean, I even heard of a story recently, maybe 2 weeks ago, where one of my coworkers covered a master hearing down in Miami, and basically everyone who was there was getting detained, having their cases thrown out, and the ICE attorney was actually crying by the end of it. There was apparently there was a Cuban family where it was just the father who didn't have status, and he was married to a U.S. citizen, had a young child, and was basically waiting through the process, and then he had to be told, "No, you're getting detained now, probably going to be deported." And normally, an ICE attorney would work with you on your case and just be like, "Okay, how much time do you need? Like, we can freeze the case." But they had orders. Everyone has to go. So a lot of these people, I don't think they're exactly enjoying what they're doing.
What's even more disturbing than evil in the department, and I think anybody who's played like Dungeons and Dragons and is familiar with like the weird axes of morality they have that goes from lawful to neutral to chaotic and encompasses neutrality, good and evil. It's that the system itself seems unprincipled. It's that like policy masks a lack of integrity and principle, and that there is nothing behind it save for this kind of arbitrary human whim. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's what you were saying, Eric, but if it was, I get the same impression. It's like we have these scraps of paper that are ultimately sort of upheld by people who are violent and may or may not be principled, but when they're not principled, it really shines through.
So to follow up on that whole discussion, talking about with the current political climate, can you talk about how things have changed more for you? Because you said practicing for 2.5 years. So that was two years through the Biden administration and now going on 7 months with the Trump administration. How have things changed for you specifically since that transition?
So it started out, I knew things were going to get harder. What we were expecting was just everyone basically being sent into immigration court and, we're going to be doing hearings like constantly. They're probably going to hire like 1 million judges to process all this. Instead, they've kind of been playing dirty. They've been grabbing people. We've had clients who we just get a call and then they're like, it's someone's family member, and they're like, yeah, they got picked up by ICE. And now, at least with the few times that's happened, they've been let go. But another thing is just cases being rescheduled, not giving us a lot of time. We're getting basically, we look at our hearing calendar and all of a sudden it's like, there's a final hearing for this case in a couple days. Why did we never get any notification of this? So things have been pretty scattershot. There's also a lot of ICE appointments being sent out. So we retain the clients for one thing, and then, now we either have to ask them to pay more or we'll just be nice and we'll go to their ICE appointment with them because everything's changed. They used to be able to maybe just call and say, my case is going on, or they'd show up with a form that says my hearing is on this date. But now there's a real risk of just having that piece of paper be ignored and be grabbed. So things have they have become a little bit busier, sure, but I think everything has just become a lot more drastic.
How about you? I mean, life a year ago is probably different. I mean, are you taking any of this home with you, thinking about it before you go to bed kind of stuff? Or is it, you compartmentalize it?
I'm able to detach to a certain degree. Generally, the cases where things have gone bad, I understand my limitations and what I have control over. And sometimes it's not much outside of myself. So that's been important to me. And I can still detach to a certain degree. But it's been very tough lately when I look at the clients that I have assigned to me and what is coming up and what I can realistically do for them. And it's tough. I have another individual hearing in the morning tomorrow, and really anything could happen. And I prepared them as best as I can, but I do have tremendous anxiety of, did I miss something? Is there going to be some new rule that I haven't heard about? Am I going to be challenged in some unpredictable way? So it is quite stressful, to put it mildly.
You're I think one of the first guests that we've had give an answer like that. Most of the people that we've talked to who are still in the careers that they chose have always said that there were certain aspects of it that kept them going, that like it was for the greater good, or they, doing this, gave them hope for things, where that was a rather pessimistic answer you just gave there. And I just wonder, is this something you think that you will continue to do in the future, or like what keeps you going?
Mm. Well, I will say it is, you might have gotten a different answer from me a couple of months ago. It is a really pessimistic time. I'm kind of concerned that that basically anything can happen at this point. At least that's what it seems like. What keeps me going is I do feel like I have a duty to help these people who have paid for my services. And it's important to me that they get not only what they paid for, but they get their best chance at obtaining legal status, which is what they really just want. So I would say that's probably my motivation. Can I do this forever? I don't think so. I think I'm going to try to maybe get back to the business side of immigration at some point. That's my long-term plan.
Yeah. Gotta look out for your mental health there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we definitely want to keep your contact information, because as of this recording, the administration just released a memo that they are going to revisit people that already have their U.S. citizenship if they have criminal records, and the legality of that's a little interesting. But I really hope we don't have an episode on that, but maybe we'll see.
It's really concerning. So denaturalization, it is something that has happened, like I don't know, a dozen cases a year perhaps, but obviously it's a little bit different if maybe they have someone and they're on a fraud charge, and maybe the cases that have been happening are going to be way different from the cases that are probably going to happen, and it is frightening.
Right. If you committed fraud during your naturalization process, I think most people can get behind that. If you've been a U.S. citizen for 5 years and you get a DUI, does that mean they could do something about it? So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Scary stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, and now Ryan, tell a joke.
Dude, I was just thinking that it's not very lighthearted today.
No, I mean, I honestly, if we had recorded this a year ago or something, I think it would have a very different tone. But I hear it. I feel it. It's just, this is like very timely in the worst way possible.
This is kind of funny. Just to light, I was just listening to your special the other day, and it reminded me that we're talking about your brother, the very specific race stereotype jokes, and you're like, man, those Chinese guys always eat up all the deviled eggs at Christmas.
You're 90% there.
Yeah. Tell it right, Eric.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just completely bungled
Anybody listening, Ryan's special is way funnier than that. Actually, check it out.
No one laughed at that at all. Everyone was laughing at me, not with me.
He delivers.
Great.
Oh, man. Kyle, thank you for joining us. This is, I think, like I said, very timely, and I think definitely something people need to hear, and we'll continue to hear.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed venting about all this too. So I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Music for Baggage provided by Quincy Ledbetter. You can find his stuff at qledbetter.com. Graphics provided by Megan Weaver. You can find her at meganweaverart.com. Special thanks to our premium members for their support. You can become a premium member by clicking subscribe in your Apple Podcast app, or by visiting thebaggagepodcast.com/support to sign up or to gift a membership to someone. A percentage of all proceeds go to charity. If you have any questions, comments, or a good story to share, please email us at thebaggagepodcast@gmail.com.